Hello everyone, my name is Selena Mosley and on behalf of the organisers Oliver Kinross, I would like to welcome you all to London Build Online. We have dozens of sessions taking place over the next 2 weeks, so be sure to check out all of the sessions yet to come via the website. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our sponsors, but with very special mention of Autodesk, our sponsor of today's session. So today's session is a panel discussion on connected procurement, the foundation of construction success. The session will be moderated by Mike Pettinella and joined by our amazing lineup of panelists. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A throughout the session, so do take your time and opportunity to submit all of your questions in the questions box to the right of your screen. I hope you all enjoy today's session, and over to you now, Mike.
Hi, Mike. It just looks like you're muted at the moment. You just need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Looks like it muted me. I apologize. Let me start over. So I was just saying that video actually got me kind of pumped up for the session. So thanks for sharing that intro. But I wanted to welcome everybody. Thanks for joining Autodesk Construction Cloud in partnership with London Build. I'm Mike Panellists. I lead the go-to-market strategy and sales team for Autodesk Construction Cloud in the EMEA market, and I'm joining you here from London. Please be joined by a great panel of 4 today, and I'll introduce each here. So first, we have Dale Sinclair, who's an architect and director of innovation for EMEA. Hello, Dale.
Hi.
You can join with your camera if you're able. Excellent. And we also have Lorraine Casey on our panel, pre-construction director at Bouygues, UK. Hello, Lorraine.
Hello there.
And then our third panelist, Lizz Robinson, key account manager for Highways England at Skanska Infrastructure. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Mike.
And then finally, our fourth panelist is Ben Rowe, Group Procurement Manager, for VolkerWessels UK. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Mike.
And together, we'll be discussing connected procurement as the foundation of construction success. We're going to look closely today at a few things: the procurement process itself, the role and value in procurement, a little bit about the impact of COVID-19, which all of us are facing, and what's next as we look into the future. And at the end of our session, we'll open up the floor to questions. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat box as we're going through the session today. The moderators, Selena and her team, will be compiling them and sending them along to us for the Q&A portion. So feel free to jump in with questions anytime, and we'll route them to the Q&A portion later. So if we are all ready, let's kick off with our first question. And Lorraine, I'll start with you if that's okay with this first question. And just to open things up, what challenges does the industry face regarding the process of procurement today, and what common procurement routes may need to change in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that question and try not to go too much into the COVID challenges. But the challenges that exist today, with or without COVID, I'd say is the issue of stockpiling, cash flowing from direct from the client route all the way through the supply chain, through to material purchasing right across the board. That's something that we really need to consider at all levels, from concept through to completion of any project at the moment, and how we might deal with that might be something that people might have some questions on today, or raise their views. I'd appreciate that. It probably is in line with COVID, but procuring at pace. We've had to change our processes and how we procure. And I'd be interested to see how some people probably have excelled at that, who are quite innovative in their business in the first instance. And some people have had to pick up, and that's new ways of working and a new skill set for some people. which is another challenge, the skill set that people have at the moment. The challenges of remote working and the platforms that we've all looked to use, this being one of them, Teams and Zoom, and how much we're using those more. That's a challenge, but I think one, particularly with use of those platforms I've just raised, people have really excelled and developed a new skill set. But some people might not have, and it's how we assist those people, people that might be losing out in the procurement world because they're not as up to speed as others. That shouldn't be a downfall of theirs. It's how we educate people and help. And the cost to the business and uncertainty of Brexit is something, a massive challenge at the moment, and how we're all going to cope with that. If I tie that up with the procurement route, my personal view, and that's all it is just to get rid of the whole race to the bottom style of procurement. And there are various procurement routes that can help us do that. Two-stage tendering is one of them, and how we execute those contracts, whether it's through the supply chain, through subcontractors and material orders, some better governance procedures in place as to how those are awarded. That's a challenge in itself and a massive area to discuss, because we're talking about innovation, sustainability, and everything else we'll probably discuss today. How those are scored, sustainability, carbon, would be really useful to hear people's views on that. It is important, but if we're just going to do race to the bottom, subcontractor orders of the materials, we're never going to achieve half the things we're setting ourselves up to. We're setting ourselves up to fail unless we act. So that's a real challenge. And inflation uncertainty, really, at the moment, that's a real challenge for all of us. And is there anything we can do collectively, or anything we can put in place to help us all manage that? And that goes towards collaborating and, the form of procurement. If the form of procurement is such that it's not collaborative, then we're not going to achieve that. So that's probably what I've got to say with regards to that at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good summary, and it's interesting you mentioned Brexit as well, because one thing we are hoping to touch on today is the balance between local and global partnerships. So that's something that could potentially evolve because of that. And I think some statistics here just to guide some of the discussion as well. And one thing I may be referencing a research report throughout this session. We had surveyed 375 professionals in UK and Ireland markets, including owners, main contractors, suppliers, subcontractors. It's called Connected Procurement, and it's something we'll reference later if you're interested. But a lot of the statistics that I'll mention are from that report. And one of them here is that 86% of contract, 78% of subcontractors and suppliers admitted that errors are routinely made during the procurement and tendering process that can impact the projects down the line, right? So what risks are there when that type of thing happens, right? What are some examples there and ways to prevent it? Maybe Dale, if you're interested in taking a stab at that one.
Yeah, I mean, well, for me, I just go back to the context of what's really happening just now in the world of change. And if you, as an architect, we certainly see the future being very different in terms of how we design a building. I think current procurement is obviously based on traditional design processes, and what we do see is a lot of optimization of those processes. And I'll give you an example. The fact that we still use drawings is suboptimal for us into the future. Why are we not leveraging our 3D model more? So for me, there's a huge difference between a 2D view from my model and a drawing. So I think there's a lot to be done to make the design process more efficient. But in the future, I mean, the UK sells £7 billion a year of construction products. And I think this route to offsite manufacturing, which we know is the future, is going to be much tougher than we imagine. And I think it does need to play into the procurement challenge, because just now, let's say if I'm designing an office building, there isn't a product that's available that I could go in and configure and then get real-time cost feedback on that product. So in the future, what we see is a whole new generation of product that is geared to configuration, the same way that you buy your car, that's made in a factory. and is made on a 24/7 factory at that, so that we've got the productivity that comes from 24/7 manufacturing. So in a sense, you need to take a leap into the future and try and predict those changes that are coming at us, certainly by the end of this decade, and then work your way backwards and say, well, how does that impact on procurement? And for me, the challenge is that I can see a future where I use configurators. There's next generation kind of deliverables that we're looking at. So if you take the AU conference last week, you know, the whole convergence of manufacturing and construction. I mean, my team's already looking at things like bills and materials. We're starting to explore with PLM technology. And so, you know, the roadmap from that first sketch that I do as an architect through to that optimum set of information for manufacturing and construction, I would say that procurement piece in the middle is a massive piece of friction. You know, so we were pulling out from that process to procure a contractor. And Lorraine's absolutely right. You know, that you know, there's different forms of procurement that impact on that in different ways. But for me, we need to look at the future, come backwards, and then say, well, how do those current procurement routes take away that friction of design automation into the future? So really, that's a big challenge for me, I think, is trying to think about how do we make the procurement process future fit. What we seem to be doing is trying to tweak traditional procurement to fit optimization of traditional design processes. We need to say, well, hey, look, if we totally have a paradigm shift in how we design buildings, what would that look like for procurement?
Yeah, that's well said. Liz or Ben, like to comment on that?
Sorry, I take myself off mute. Yeah, so I think some good points there. I think for procurement to add value, it's really important it's engaged early in the process, which certainly at VolkerWessels, we're very passionate about that. So our procurement team will be engaged at the bid stage, the tender stage, so working with our senior estimators, the work winning the ops people. So that's something, I mean, all in all, across our different business units, Volker Fitzpatrick, Highways, Steven, Blazer, Rowe, we've probably got around 50 procurement professionals, which is a good number, but still fairly thin. So resource is precious. So I think for procurement to become more connected, that procurement needs to be well resourced. And my director reports to Alan Robertson, our chief executive. So I think procurement needs to have a voice at the top table. So clearly, procurement is realised to add value at Volker. I think, unfortunately, in the top 100 UK contractors, not every contractor would have that luxury of the number of people we've got. We would say we need more in procurement, which department wouldn't say that, I suppose. But so it's important ensuring that your procurement team's involved, getting the right people, the people to be well trained, and clearly that word about value, end-to-end value. I think we're going to talk about sustainability later today, which clearly thinking the whole thing through, and we talked about the race to the bottom. So I think most good procurement professionals realise now that pay peanuts, get monkeys, that cheapest isn't always the best. So there's a real element on value. We still operate, as you all well know, in a very, very competitive marketplace, where if you return a 3% EBITDA margin, that you're kind of best practice in our contractor peer group. So why you operate in a market that's so competitive as that, and some competitors now probably with post-COVID, or as we come hopefully near to the end of COVID, but a very competitive marketplace has become even more competitive. So that there is a danger that we mustn't return to being tempted just to choose the cheapest bid tender that's on, because like I've just said, cheapest isn't always best, but clearly on such thin margins that we can't pay over the odds or anything as well. So let's never be frightened to remember that in anything we're talking about, that the value, that you've got to be competitive, you've got to be very good at it. We want to talk about all of the other things, the quality, the sustainability, the innovation, the good ideas that anybody can bring to a process or a procedure, but let's never lose sight of that in a competitive world, that price will always be very important as well. But yeah, I think we've got a lot more open mindedness about people wanting to understand and get involved in the whole life cost, which is where you can really add real value.
I think also just to add to Ben on that one is that we need to remember that we're not just procuring the first tier. So when we're procuring, we're procuring an entire supply chain. So from a tier one contractor in infrastructure and highways, 80% of the work is done by supply chain. So if the contract for the tier one contractor puts a lot of squeeze on the tier one contractor, then they're going to naturally, or historically they would have, that would have been translated down into the lower tiers. So we need to be mindful that we're actually engaging the procurement process with the supply chain really early on to make sure that we're not putting something that disadvantages their sustainability as well for the future. Because obviously, you know, it's not just us that thrives on long-term frameworks or long-term big contracts. It's the rest of the UK PLC. So we all have to make sure that we're being ethical in how we're procuring and how we are being procured, because it does translate.
Yeah, there's always a balance between, you know, lowest cost and best quality, right? And I think that's certainly is a challenge in construction overall, and starts with procurement. So Lizz, staying with you for a moment on that topic, how do we continue to raise the bar when competition in procurement, you know, like you mentioned, like Ben mentioned, you know, 3% margins, you know, competition is fierce sometimes. So is that somehow blocking sharing and collaboration among peer groups, or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that there has to be an element of responsibility and accountability in the procurement process. Whilst we traditionally procure on cost and quality, that historically drives competitive advantage, because obviously everyone's hiding their homework for the next big tender. What we actually want the industry to be doing is to be increasing in efficiency and predictability for our clients. So obviously happy clients, you end up with a sustainable pipeline for the future. But when you've got people that are procured by getting one-upmanship over their peers, then that's driving uncollaborative behaviours. So just relaying sort of some of my experience with a Highways England contract that I was part of the authoring with, we built in some of the sharing platforms, but I'm still recognising that companies don't like sharing, because that means that they're not going to get the next Lower Thames crossing or the A303, etc., you know, the really big mega schemes. So how do you actually take competition out of tenders but still enable the best value? And we have to keep focusing on value rather than cost and quality. So how do we change so that we're getting the right value for UK PLC rather than, or for, you know, for shareholders, rather than continually looking for low price and who's kept the information up their sleeves for the longest. So I don't think we'll be there in the next decade or two. I don't think the answer's been written yet. I hope to see a space where one day we are procured on sharing and value, and that's it. How good are you at pushing solutions that drive efficiency out into the market? Because then actually we start realizing that those 3% margins become 8% margins, and then those then make the rest of the supply chain more sustainable. It's kind of like the aspiration, the heaven of what a procurement would look like. And it's, as I say, it's going to take a long time to get there, but I do think we have to change from cost quality.
Yes.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that topic before we move to the next?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on it briefly. I think certainly we see the value of investing in, you know, technology, but it's certainly a leap of faith when you're, you know, everyone's, you know, having to bid in a very competitive market, and I think that's really the big challenge for the business is trying to understand what are the right investments to make. I mean, there are so many pieces of technology out there just now, and I think case studies are definitely real out there. You know, crossing the chasm and so on really requires robust case studies. So certainly for us, trying to build the case studies that are using the innovation that we're building upon you know, is absolutely crucial, and it may be for several projects we're working with new technology back of house, you know, as AECOM, just until we're confident that we can roll that above the surface and then show the client the case study. So you've got that double challenge of trying to invest, but then really being absolutely sure that you're picking the right investments that will drive those efficiency savings into the future.
And I think to build on that, Dale, I think the challenge is that we all have different aspirations as businesses. So we all know as an industry we need to be better with data. We all know that we need to be better with innovation, technologies, you know, people, resources, carbon, EDI, the list goes on. But when we start looking at the likes of the social value PPM that's been released, it's only when actually one body, one industry body or governing body sets a strategy that everyone abides by, that you actually have a real focus to drive the change. So if you've all got a different carbon agenda, then you end up with a really confusing message that goes down to the supply chain as to what targets they're working for under what company they're working for. So actually what would be better would be if we all took one key thing each, you know, so AECOM, if you want to do the BIM stuff, and Skanska do the carbon stuff, and actually we all bring the industry and our clients, you know, and our supply chain together to really drive that focus, then we'll suddenly start seeing impact. But at the moment, we all do it individually because we know that it's going to be something we can use to compete with.
Yeah,
that's true.
I think we are getting a little bit better at collaborating. That clearly, a lot of us work together on joint ventures. So Bouygues, we'd be working with you on the Align JV, High Speed 2 work. Lizz, we haven't worked together yet, but we work with some of other peer group, Kier and Morgan Sindall, Lang O'Rourke. So I think as we work on these big joint ventures, that leads us to share good practice. Best for me, a joint venture really should be challenging each organisation, taking the best from both and taking the best way forwards in a pragmatic manner. In construction line, we've been part of a working group, certainly again working with Bouygues, McAlpine, Kier, Vinci, where we see pre-qualification stage 1 of the procurement process that we can work together to reduce duplication, remove unnecessary paperwork forms. That we're a big advocate of the common assessment standard supported by Build UK. We've worked very closely with Construction Line. Achilles and Chaz are going to become part of this common assessment standard family, and it's a real example of us working with our peer group, being very open and honest, transparent about our previous approach to managing our stage 1 pre-qualification, and setting out a roadmap and a journey of how actually we can realizing that a number of our subcontractors will also work for our competitors, making the core stage 1 process as simple and straightforward, while having a bar that means that manages risk, but making sure that they don't have to fill in 100 different forms to get them on board in a good manner. And then where we can add value is how we then do our stage 2 procurement, the project specific questions, and how we look after them, our supply chain management, how hopefully I would want our subcontractors, major suppliers, I want them to work for Volker because they know when they come and work for Volker, we pay them on time and we treat them with integrity and respect and fairness, and we do all of the right things. And I'm sure Lizz, Lorraine, Dal, that you guys will run a similar good ship as us and do that as well. And that's where I would see us being more competitive, because I'd want our subbies to rather work for us because we treat them better than you, I suppose. But on that stage 1, I'm quite happy to collaborate, and I think we are more grown up about that than we were 20 years ago, where perhaps we'd all be. There's a lot of work in infrastructure and commercial building and house building. There's more than enough work for everybody to go around here, isn't it? And it's just that kind of that if we can learn from each other, then we can be better together, really.
Yeah, with the amount of work increasing, especially on the infrastructure over the next few years, potentially, you know, the need to expand to additional subcontractor suppliers, new partners, is something that the industry faces. And one of the statistics we found is that 31% of main contractors have experienced reputational damage to their company by working with a new subcontractor that they may not have fully vetted out. And it's always a balance, right? So Dale, what's the importance of working with trusted partners? And then how do you find that balance of local and global partnerships during the procurement process?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's quite interesting. I mean, certainly we all like to work with people that we can trust, and we all like to work with people that we've worked with before. It just gives us comfort, especially when we've got the personalities are known and the relationships are established. But what we're finding is that, you know, in order to move forward, you need to work with new companies. So trying to get comfortable with people very quickly, I think, is a new skill almost. It's how do I learn to trust this company moving forward? I think one of the great things in terms of COVID-19, if there are many positives to come out of it, are certainly as AECOM, we're now starting to look more globally. I mean, what we've realized is when we start to get into a Teams environment, I can inform, or rather I can build a team using anyone from AECOM in the world. So you know, before COVID, I had lots of conversations with our structures team, for example, in Melbourne. I spoke to some of the guys in Abu Dhabi on different things, and now we're saying, well, actually, we can make this happen. We can actually build global teams for different clients and different projects. So I find that really exciting. And I think what's going to be interesting to see when we get this new generation of design for manufacture product coming through. I mean, certainly some of the other industries, so Siemens and others have started to look at local factories. So, you know, you design global and manufacture local. I think it'd be interesting to see if any of that comes to fruition. You know, Heathrow, we're obviously starting to look at distributing, you know, hubs around the UK to push work outside of London. That will obviously take a while to come back. But I think the idea of us designing from anywhere in the world and then making things locally, I think that's a really exciting prospect. And of course, we've got a whole new generation of technologies coming from additive manufacturing, as I say, robotics. I mean, robotics, I think, will really start to play for making things, because it's going to be quite tough to get new standards in place for, like, say, new materials, or for, you know, let's say a 3D printed facade. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. It will take a long, long time to get the standards in place to do that sort of thing. But certainly if a machine's being used to make something in a factory, and then that thing is you know, using traditional materials, I think that will be easier to work. But I think we will increasingly work more globally, and I think that's a really, really exciting thing.
Absolutely. Lorraine, what are your thoughts on partners and maintaining good partners and having good experiences with new partners?
Sorry, was that to me? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I was just saying, what are your thoughts on maintaining good partners and the importance of partnerships during the procurement process, and also you know, the ability to obtain and work with new partners in the best way?
Yeah, it's what you define as collaboration, transparency and openness, those things that you need the other side to see exist in your organisation. That's not easy when it comes to partnering with new clients, for example, and we'll tie in all the things that we're looking to discuss here: innovation, sustainability. You know, we want to build innovative new solutions, but what we need is trust from our clients that we can do that, because there'll often be bespoke designs when we've got our own house build types. In order to make that work, you need commitment up front, and that's a special partnership, because that's the client putting a lot of trust in you. And how do you get that to that point? And some of that's to do with business cultures. There needs to be a culture of trust, and there's not in a lot of this industry at the moment, and it's something that needs to change. Particularly on open book. If it's open book, it's open book. Yet there's still that reluctance. So with regards to existing clients, it's demonstrating to them that you're going to be open, honest and transparent and collaborative. But we're now having to be collaborative on a whole new level. And it's how quickly you develop and change at pace at the moment in order to maintain those relationships, because a lot of our clients are developing, adapting, moving at pace. We need to do it the same, but you also need to have the people with a skill set at management, leadership level that are capable of doing that in a remote environment. I've probably gone into a lot of different areas there, but they're all linked to maintaining and managing client and new client relationships.
Yeah, that's important, because it's always about refining your existing list of trusted partners, right? It should expand over time, but it also needs to be maintained and updated over time as things change with these businesses. So all extremely relevant points. I'd like to move over to sustainability. There was a couple comments on sustainability. I think it's a really good topic and something that is in front of mind for many of you and many of those on the call. So, and as an example, owners are focused on adapting new sustainable construction designs or methodologies, and 41% of them, according to our survey, are incorporating sustainable construction requirements into their tender invitation. So it really is becoming enforced from the asset owner down. So to Ben here, what do you think 2021 will see a rise of sustainable procurement, and what premium do you think companies are going to be willing to pay to go cradle to grave green supply chain solutions?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, no, good question. I'm excited about 2021. I think if nothing else, hopefully it'll be the end of this horrible pandemic situation we find ourselves in. But hopefully what it is going to bring is the rise of sustainable procurement. So now this is not necessarily a new subject by any means, and I remember doing some very good work well over a decade ago, pre-2008 really, and we made some good inroads into, I used to work for McNicholas, that's now owned by Clare, and at the time we called it Making McNicholas Go Greener, and we really engaged the organisation, had the Energy Saving Trust, and done a lot of good things. I think 12 years later, it's still disappointing that it's still not 100% there. I think it's an ongoing continuous improvement challenge to drive a more sustainable outcome. I think we do some very good things. Sometimes, as ever, by the nature of contracting, we can be guilty of doing great things in silos, and then at group level, it's as good as trying to share that good practice and doing it consistently across the board, which as ever with good ideas, often a lot of good ideas it's hard to innovation. It's always hard to come up with an eureka new idea. So just replicating good practice is something we should never be forget. Is a very good thing to do. I do think clearly it's getting a lot more press on it with the recent announcements by the government to ban any diesel vehicles from 2030. That we've got next year, potentially, or the year after, actually April 21, the end of the red diesel levy, which clearly that there's a number of more sustainable fuels out in the marketplace, HVO, and some fuel additives that we could add to make the green fit. Bringing that back to a procurement perspective, though, is that we procure directly around 7 to 8 million litres of fuel per year. So paying a penny more instantly puts £80,000 on our fuel bill, and then we've got our £500 million of subcontractor spend that will have heavy fuel usage in there. So clearly our actual fuel usage is much more than the 8 million that we directly purchase ourselves. So what the second question you asked me is, what premium would we be prepared to pay? Now clearly I remember sitting in my garden in the height of lockdown and talking to my wife and having a nice relaxing evening looking at the sky. I've never seen it so clear. So I think those that were skeptical about why we need to do this really learned then that it was so peaceful, that it reminded me of when we went to the Maldives and you could pick a star out the sky, that there wasn't pollution. We live in Rickmansworth, not a million miles from Heathrow, so I guess there's quite a lot of M25 traffic near to where I live, and it was so it did really realise, and we've got a big impact. We can make a massive difference, and I don't think for me in procurement that you can become a much more rounded procurement professional, and that we open this discussion around how can we make the procurement process more connected, more added value, not just being about the price. So I think sustainable procurement gives you a real framework for building them pillars and principles of what really good procurement looks like. I think a lot of us have been procuring sustainably for many decades, and that probably the best procurement people have always been looking at the end-to-end cost, because that's good procurement. You want to look at every angle you can to get the best deal you can, but clearly building in more points, scores, sustainability. We work with a supply chain school. We're a gold or a partner, gold status. We've got engaged over 100 people to join the school this year that weren't members before. They've taken over 1,000 hours of learning, and it's trying to encourage internally and our supply chain to start this learning journey and really get it, but we can't mandate it, because ultimately that people have got to want to learn. I remember as a kid, I loved going to the library. It was a treat. You went, you take your book back, you get another book, but you didn't have to go to the library. You wanted to go to the library, didn't you? And we've got to really make people get sustainability like that. They've got to really want to grasp it. And some people will always want to do what they've always done, and which could just be use the person they've always used, but there's method in that, because the person that they've always used has done a good job. So we're not saying that, but it's perhaps, can we teach that company that have always done it that way? Is there some new ways of working? And there's some real exciting developments. I think companies need to articulate their solutions to us all in a better manner. So sometimes we get ideas put in front of us. We want to trial them. That just getting trials off the ground can be challenging, to try and get feedback and get information to be able to prove that this is the right thing. Clearly, when something's embryonic, it's going to cost you more. If you buy an iPhone 12, clearly it's expensive, isn't it? So being at the real forefront of a sustainable solution is never going to be the cheapest. I kind of get that. We're going to try and support it as much as we can. One of my favorite sayings is that we can't go green and broke. So we talked earlier about working on very thin margins. So for us, this work, we really need a connected supply chain. We need the client, the main contractor, our subcontractor delivery team, where we self-deliver, our own in-house self-delivery, our people in-house to really grow up. Everybody in that supply chain have got a grasp and really consider and work together to get it. But we will possibly pay a small premium, but when you work on margins as small as us, ideally companies need to be pitching us solutions that ideally save us money and make us more sustainable, or at least a near the break-even mark. And where they're going to cost us more, they really need to articulate the added value, or try and explain perhaps the long-term plan to us of how on day one they're going to cost you more. But like the car industry, when we scale up and we get smarter and clever and we can improve processes, that if we struck a deal with a car manufacturer, the contract would be the price on day one is not the price on year 5. It's year on year cost reduction, and it's installing that kind of. So I think in procurement we will want to talk about added value, and let's never be frightened of talking about price is very, very important, along with all of the other elements that make up a good deal.
I think Ben, sometimes we forget, we talk about this, whether it's a house or a car, whatever it is, we tend to look at it from our perspective. Actually, that house is going to be someone's home. It's going to be their community, and that car is going to be with someone for a long time. And if you liken it to yours, you want it to last. And without considering all of these areas that we just spoke about, social value, sustainability, innovation, without all those things don't get better. Our homes don't get better, our communities don't get better, and the quality of our cars doesn't get better. So it's really it's how we promote it, isn't it? And everybody buying into that. And at the moment, I'm not sure everybody does, but it's definitely something that needs to be developed collectively in the industry. Really.
Yeah, and just to add to Lorraine's point, so Skanska, I think, are probably one of the only companies that actually measure all of the carbon across their supply chain as well. So we are taking full responsibility for the fact that there's a green target and that we are going to deliver it. This isn't something where we've got a choice now. I've got a 14-year-old who regularly comes to our carbon events and asks all the grown-ups, why are you not fixing the planet? You know, this isn't something that we can skirt around the issue of now. There is no time for competitive advantage. This is a time to bring everybody together to make sure that we don't hand a dead planet down to our next generation. And unfortunately, like it or loathe it, that has to come into the procurement arrangements, and not just how we're procured, but going back to my previous point about how we also procure our supply chain. And I don't think it necessarily does need to cost a premium. I think that actually, if you have a green solution, it doesn't always tend to be the most expensive solution. And if you are engaging with people early enough, you will actually save money through the construction by putting in carbon neutral solutions. So it's just how you manage that process and the stakeholders, and making sure that you've got businesses that role model those from the top down. And I'm really blessed that Skanska absolutely have that bit nailed. It's you walk through the front door of the office in Rickmansworth, you know that we've got a green agenda. So maybe, you know, there just needs to be more of that across the industry.
Yeah, I think Dale's done a really good job working with Sean MacArthur on the supply chain school, and I think you're right, Skanska are definitely at the forefront of that. I think we're all really committed. We mandated eco tower lights probably about 18 months ago and got rid of the old VT1 diesels, and that was a real bottom line cost saving on top of the CO2 saving. And there's some of this stuff that would naturally, and this year our primary supplier Sunbelt Rentals have gone and bought 2,000 more to add to their large fleet, and that ultimately in 5 years time there won't be any VT1 diesel tower lights. There'll be out with a dark age, or some small subby might have a couple of old clapped out ones somewhere that shouldn't be on a tier 1 contractor's site, and we'd make sure they're not. But there's an element of some of this the good will naturally come through, isn't it? I think the forward thinking procurement and contractors can make sure that we're there ahead of the game a little bit. We're not getting rid of VT1s in 5 years time. We've got rid of them now, because we know that going to LED lights is the way forward. To try and have a hybrid or a solar solution where we can is the way but the things like solar, the jury's still out. It's not 100%. It's dark now. There is still question marks around this. We've tried electric excavators. An electric telehandler is very good to us, running around the yard where the charging point's there. But Liz, you'll know this in highways, a 1.5 ton excavator only runs for 4 hours. JCB, Britain's brilliant manufacturer, well for it, but we don't just want it working for 4 hours, and then we've got little jobs here and there, so then we'd have to pick it up and then take it back to depot to recharge it. So it's not totally sustained. So there's solutions that are almost there, but not 100%. We will get there, and we've got to just keep stretching them boundaries, keep saying, right, we want an electric excavator, we want it for 8 hours a day. We wouldn't always use it for 8 hours a day, but we're getting there slowly but surely. And yeah, but yeah, like I say, we will be prepared to pay a small premium, very small.
Yeah. I think this is great discussion around sustainability. I think it needs to come from the top in many ways in order to encourage it. And by the top, I mean owners that are requiring assets want those assets to be sustainable. So that will certainly help. But that pressure from the procurement channel and the education around it is going to drive that change. So really powerful stuff. If I may, I'd like to get to one final subject before we cover some audience questions here, which is, when we think about looking into the future, how can specific technology and innovation around that space really help the industry overcome some of these challenges, including what we've experienced now with COVID-19, and the need to be more remotely connected. We see a lot of companies' digital journeys accelerating in a way because they realize that the remote collaboration is such a critical part of their business and other areas. So let's start with Lorraine. What thoughts do you have on that, and how that could impact the future of procurement and construction? And then maybe we'll go to Dale.
Yeah, I think that the technology side of it, the remote systems that are now in place where people have had to adapt to the new norm, working remotely in those platforms, but there's a lot more due to COVID, probably more than anything. It's not a bad thing, something good out of something bad. People have really started to look at their forecasting probably in a lot more detail than they ever did before, and put a lot more emphasis on that and how you might impose risk on that in the forecasting. As we know, it's very difficult at the moment to predict the future, but there's a lot of digital platforms out there that help you collect and use the data you already have. So I think that's really important, and a lot of the VR technology that people are using on sites, and that's being used across the board at all levels, by all forms of all companies really, whether we're talking to the community because we're remotely, VR is important, 3D animation, visualization is more important than ever when you're trying to explain to people what you're going to do and how you're going to do it at any level. So I think that's been received really well. Robotics has been mentioned today.
Liz, if you could just mute your line. Thank you.
I think something that I was looking up today actually is educating people about companies that want to be innovative and sustainable, about the tax credits that are available to those companies that do, and the Sustainable Innovation Fund that's available, that's recently been launched. Now, how many people on the call are aware of that? Because I think some people are afraid to step forward and look into innovation. It costs a lot of people, but if the funding's there, maybe they might think differently, and that's really positive if people can be made a lot more aware of that and how they might get around the cost of being more innovative, which actually will make them more productive and more profitable in the future. How might they do that? So there's a few ideas there really, based on current experience.
Excellent, thank you. Dale, you want to close us out on this question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I suppose before COVID-19, I was beginning to get concerned that let's say that the lag between the innovators and let's say the mainstream industry was increasing every single day. So I think it's great that what COVID-19 has done is let's say get many more people onto the digital ladder, let's call it, onto the first rung of the ladder, getting into teams, getting into that digital environment. But let's not pretend that using Teams is innovation. You know, that's the kind of starter for 10, if you like. And I think that the key thing for me is we do a lot of free horizon thinking, because, you know, when you see how many bits of technology are out there at this point in time, it's really difficult to try and figure out where to make your investment. So certainly with my team, I'm looking for the technologies I can drive change with today, but at the same time I need to be mindful of, you know, what I can use say in 6 months time, and of course things like AI. We do have a number of AI initiatives, but I don't really see that driving massive transformation for another 5 years. So what I would like to see industry doing is coming together and trying to make some sense of the different technologies that are out there to try and help us focus on the let's say the tools and technologies that will drive change today, because I think that would help us all. And similarly, I've seen a massive influx of tech industries coming into construction now. They're obviously really excited about it. So if we can bring some clarity to them about where to make their investments, I think that would also help us to scale up digital and innovation across industry.
That's well said. I think any technology company has just as much of a obligation to be consultative in their approach and what they're seeing in the market as they are as a vendor, a software vendor, right? So I think those are the important things to move the industry forward. Okay, so excellent discussion. Thank you all. We're going to move to some audience questions before we wrap things up. This one's actually quite interesting and a really good topic to cover here. So do we think that we have a good pool of diverse talent coming through to procurement, and how do we ensure we're attracting more women and minorities to the procurement industry? Someone want to tackle that one?
I'll have a go. We're not. I think is the simple answer at the moment. I think we know it needs to be addressed. I think we know that the industry as a whole, not just the procurement, it doesn't just look at diversity in terms of gender and race, but also appreciating diversity of thoughts. So there's a real big topic around psychological safety that would actually start making not just procurement, but also the industry more attractive. So I think we're in sort of a mindset at the moment where if you offer flexible working, then the women will flock. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry to burst the bubble, but it's not me being able to, you know, do the washing during the day that makes me want to work in construction and infrastructure. It's actually the fact that I'm able to be my whole self at work, and that's something that, again, along with everything else I've probably said today, we haven't really got the answer. But do you know what? I think over the past 6 months, there's been a real sort of genuine effort being made to try and understand where our problems are as an industry, and to start promoting that we should be different and can be different. And a lot of the things that we do is because the contract tells us to. So there's, you know, we've got sort of EDI targets in our contracts with Highways England. We should do it because it's the right thing to do. And actually, it makes a lot of money for businesses if we've got high performing, diverse teams. And that's the bit that is not understood because it's not necessarily quantified at the moment. So, you know, some of the data that sits behind that to then quantify the benefits will then suddenly see businesses going, oh, actually, you know, here we go again, our 3% could be 8% if we put more energy and effort into changing the face of the industry. So it's big opportunity, really huge opportunity, and we don't actually know at this generation what the jobs of the future are going to look like. So, you know, the next generation will be the ones that dictate how we do this, and we'll just have to blindly follow and hopefully catch up with them. But, you know, it's going to be the next generation that tell us, make their demands as to what they want to see from construction and infrastructure, and obviously in turn in the procurement realms as well.
I think we are. I think we're making inroads. I think you're dead right, Liz, that the clients are driving this as well. So I think that clearly focuses any contractor's mind. Clearly, a contractor by nature is in contracting to make money, as most people are in business. So that clearly that is high on our agenda. We've got a very good lady, Holly Cregan, that leads it for us, and that's a new position that's only been in place for about three years. So she heads up. So clearly, I think getting somebody that seat at the top table starts to influence the top team. That I think we're lucky to have Holly. She's done a great job for us, but certainly the training that's been rolled out, the awareness is much greater within Volker. And I know for myself that clearly a high performing team is when you've got a collection of different skill bases, individuals, personalities, backgrounds, experiences. So if you look at construction, too often the top table is generally older gentlemen, isn't it, with grey hair, if any hair. So the work we do is so complicated that it's not that job isn't a young man's job. You need them grey hairs to have that right to sit at that table. But the more that we can have diversity in the supporting teams, more that you could have younger people, more diverse people on that table, then perhaps that will be when you do achieve true innovation. Because that certainly the construction, if you look across construction, it generally will be guilty of doing what it's always done, isn't it? Whereas that Liz talked earlier about a 14-year-old challenging them at their annual conference, whatever it was. But whereas new young thinking really just stretches the status quo, isn't it? That when I was young, when I was my daughter's age, we had one bin that my daughter 11's grown up with always having to recycle, isn't it? So the person that just threw it all in one bin or one skip, as was in our world, I suppose she would just be like, what are you idiots doing? It's madness. So the sooner you can get some of that younger generation in influence, and it's a good thing. And I think diversity is a wonderful thing. It's a great industry, and you want people that are passionate to get involved, isn't it? So for me, that's the real key thing, isn't it? It's about passion. But if you can have passion and diversity and knowledge, you've probably got a very high performing team.
I think the way I see it is, Mike, and I think Liz picked up that the jobs of the future haven't been invented yet. I mean, certainly see some of the trends I see around offsite manufacturing and net zero economies. I was reading something recently where it was talking about anthropologists getting involved in the project team of the future. So I think what really excites me is I see a completely different industry in the future with new people coming in, new professions, data scientists, environmentalists, scientists themselves, more engagement between science and engineering. And I think it's going to be really exciting. So I think that, it's the construction industry has never been exciting to school kids, but I think a reimagined construction industry in the future, I think we can get out to the schools and really get the next generation of school kids saying, wow, I really want to be part of this. This is absolutely amazing. So yeah, I'm incredibly optimistic and exciting about what faces us in the future, and that will be a much more diverse industry.
Thank you. I think that's a great tone to kind of leave our session with. And I think I want to thank all of our panelists. We have come up on time. Sorry we didn't get to more of our audience questions, but we appreciate all of your time out there for listening. And I want to thank our panelists here, Dale, Lorraine, Liz, and Ben, for your time today. We appreciate the discussion and hope you all in the audience found the discussion to be insightful. And I also want to thank our hosts, London Build, for bringing this great event to life virtually, which I know was probably challenging, but well done, and look forward to a good week. And a copy of the recording will be available on the London Build website to watch on demand. And we'll also be sending a copy of the connected procurement report that I mentioned earlier to all attendees, so feel free to review that. And you can also download it on the London Build website later in the week. And with that, I will hand it over to our host to close off the session. But thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mike, for moderating today's session, to all of our panelists and to everyone in the audience who has tuned in today. As Mike mentioned, an on-demand copy of the session will be available on the website in the coming days. Don't forget to download as well the handouts. You should be able to see that to the right of your screen. The handout will also be available to download on the website. All sessions are CPD accredited, so you'll receive your certificates within 1 month after today's session. If you have any further feedback or questions for us, please drop us an email and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. So our next session of the series is actually taking place tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning, and this is a panel discussion on BIM workflow efficiency. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and we hope to see you all again for tomorrow's sessions. Thanks, speakers.
Are you there?